What a show this promises to be today. We've got the brilliant Dr. Aseem Malhotra. Then we'll be joined by Dr. Ian Lake, who's a phenomenal GP specialising in diabetes. He's got a great story to tell. And then we'll be going to a food bank later on to meet Samantha Stapley of the Trussell Trust. If you are new to us, let me just quickly tell you the whole purpose of this live TV show every day. 3 purposes. 1, how do we build our defense mechanism, our own immune system to make us stronger so that if we were to get corona, COVID-19 in our family, how do we bolster everybody's immune system? 2, how do we raise more money for the food banks? Because right now in the UK, there is a huge problem in that less people are donating into the boxes as they're rushing around the supermarkets. And 3, let's try and look for some positives as we come out, as we rebuild, as we climb out the other side of COVID-19. What are the positives that might have come out of this big tragic event? But today I want to dive straight in because Dr. Aseem and Dr. Ian have got some great advice for us. Aseem, are you there yet?
Steve, I am.
Hey,
how are you?
Good morning, mate. Really good. How are you?
Morning. I'm good, thanks.
You bearing up?
Absolutely, yeah. It's a nice sunny day outside, isn't it?
Yeah, no, you've had a shave, mate. Thanks for dressing up for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't like shaving unless I have to.
Now, I know you're locking down, or you're obviously helping people, you're writing your next book. Let's today then discuss what it is we can recommend to all our families and friends and loved ones and viewers. What can we do to be stronger?
I think first thing, Steve, to talk about is just to reiterate the government advice about hand washing, social distancing, but just to try and help people understand why that's really important. So we've talked about the fact that if people adhere to these recommendations, which really should be mandatory about keeping 2-meter distance from people, washing your hands regularly, that will reduce the load on the NHS. And the primary reason we're doing all of this is to try and protect the NHS from being overloaded. And it's not just about reducing the admissions from COVID-19, but if you think about this, if the health system is overwhelmed by patients coming in with COVID-19, then other people with other health problems are also going to get neglected and suffer because of it. So actually, we're helping the whole of the healthcare system here by the social distancing. The other thing to add as well, because there's a lot of reports, as you know, in the media about younger so-called healthy people contracting this and succumbing and unfortunately dying from COVID-19. Now, we'll talk a little bit later about the susceptibility of some of those individuals, but one of the most important things is frontline workers are quite vulnerable because they're exposed to a very high viral load. And what that means is, in essence, if you are exposed to more of the virus, then your immune system has less time to adapt and to fight back against it. Now, that also applies to how we're doing social distancing, because even if, and you've mentioned this already, there is a good chance at some point, like the flu, for example, most of us will probably get some form of the virus. We'll get the virus and hopefully just have mild symptoms. If you're adhering to these sorts of rules, even if you contract the virus, the likelihood is, by adhering to these social sort of rules of hand washing regularly and social distancing, the viral load will be less. Mm-hmm. If the viral load is less, your body's able to deal with it better. Okay. So I think that's really important to emphasize. On top of that, Steve, again, one of the things that's been exposed with all of this, and I'm really going to quote one of my colleagues and friends who works at one of the largest and busiest A&E in the whole of the United States. He said this COVID-19 has exposed the greatest failures of our healthcare system. Okay. And what does he mean by that? The way that our healthcare system has been functioning for many, many years, Steve, has been one which has been a finance-based system. It's a sickness-based system. It's maldistribution of resources. It's putting money in the wrong place. It's giving people pills with minimal effectiveness and putting all the spending there, and not concentrating on the root causes and how they can be tackled with lifestyle. Mm-hmm. If you have COVID-19, if you get the virus, if you've got comorbidities, if you've got type 2 diabetes in particular, I know Ian will talk about that later, but high blood pressure, heart disease, you are much more likely to suffer serious complications. So just give you some perspective, people who do not have any comorbidities, no other chronic illnesses related to lifestyle, the statistics vary, but roughly around 0.9% of those people will die. So, which is still quite a high number, probably tenfold more than the flu. So almost one in 100 people.
That's less than 1%, yeah.
Less than 1%.
Okay.
If you've got type 2 diabetes, it's about 7.3%.
Right.
It's 8-fold increased risk of mortality.
Okay.
Now, it isn't all doom and gloom, Steve, as you know, because you can do something to reduce not just your risk of type 2 diabetes, but if you've got it, to control your blood glucose. The reason why people with type 2 diabetes are more vulnerable is because of high blood glucose. If you've got high blood glucose, it's quite complicated, but essentially the immune system doesn't function optimally. You have an increased inflammatory response. You're more likely to get respiratory failure. Now, controlling blood glucose, we know that even in hospital, and I've done this myself for many years. It's been known, for example, people with heart disease who come in with heart attacks, if their blood glucose is better controlled, when they've had the heart attack, they have better outcomes. They're less likely to die, less likely to have complications from heart disease, less likely to get infections, etc. So there's one thing about controlling blood glucose on the front line, but also, as you know, if people change their diet, specifically cut out the ultra-processed foods, more specifically with the type 2 diabetics, really cut out all of the starchy and refined carbohydrates from their diet and sugar, many of these people, varying from 25 to 50%, depending what group you're in, whether you're obese or normal weight type 2 diabetic, can send their type 2 diabetes, Steve, into remission within weeks to months. Wow. I've seen patients on my own PIOPI diet, if you like, low carb Mediterranean diet, which I advocate for, who've reversed their type 2 diabetes in 28 days.
Wow.
Having been type 2 diabetic for 15 years.
Yeah.
So I think that message is really crucial that people need to understand. And I think moving forward, and we'll come through this for sure, I'm sure we'll come through it, is what do we then go back to? We need to try, and all of us now need to be much more vocal and advocate for making sure that lifestyle prescription is at the forefront, at the absolute forefront of managing these chronic conditions. This is in hospital, this is through general practice, this is through public health interventions, it's about improving the food environment, it's about getting junk food out of hospitals. Sure. 50% of our NHS employees, I've spoken about this before and written about it, more than 50% of our NHS employees, 1.4 million people work for the NHS, are overweight or obese, Steve. And it's not just about body weight, as you know, it's about these metabolic abnormalities. But just think of a world where we could get that figure down, sure. to much less than only 12%, 12 to 15%, if you like, of Americans, and our figures are probably quite similar, are metabolically healthy. That's absolutely shocking. How have we allowed this to happen?
It's frightening, isn't it?
And I think this whole issue of COVID-19, this should highlight this issue, and should be used that we move forward productively and positively, so that we can get more people healthier, have a better quality of life and greater longevity. I think nobody would argue against that being, a noble pursuit, if you like.
So after social distancing, washing our hands, put those to one side, the third best defense, after doing the first two, which everybody's talking about, the third best defense then would to get on that path of reducing your weight if you're overweight. I read some stats recently that even the flu, if you are overweight or obese, you have more severe effects of the flu than somebody of average weight.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Steve. Yeah.
So in a country where in the last 50 years, so I'm 54 years old, in the last 50 years, the average adult has gained 2.5 stone. That's about 16 kg. So if the average adult has gained 16 kg, surely the best defense mechanism right now, if we are overweight or have any metabolic syndromes, is to day by day start to get control of our weight. And you told me once, I thought it was a beautiful line you said, within 21 days of making changes, metabolically, amazing things can happen within the body. And I would guess and surmise that if you are on the journey to better health, automatically you're building your defense systems.
Absolutely. And that, that's a crucial point that, I know it's slightly cliched and people within some of the evidence-based medicine community may, be cynical about this, but the reality is food is medicine, can work as a medicine, nutritious food, especially now, because a lot of the problems we're having in healthcare, they're affecting people's health adversely is because of poor diet, but it still isn't getting enough emphasis. Yes. I know there's a lot of stuff around exercise, the huge exercise industry, and I'm, a huge advocate for exercise because for me, actually, it's not just about physical health, it's about mental health. I just feel better, I'm more creative when I'm doing exercise. All of the hormones that get released that have that positive effect on your mind happen through exercise. But when it comes to overall health, poor diet now is responsible for more disease and death globally than physical inactivity, smoking, and alcohol combined. And this isn't just about being overweight. It's about not getting enough nutrients, not getting enough omega-3 fatty acids, consuming too many omega-6s, not having enough, fiber from whole foods within your diet. All of these things combine. And that affects many people who are normal weight, Steve.
Sure.
So there are people watching this saying, I'm not overweight, I'm fine. No, metabolic disease affects everybody of all sizes. Now, yes, obesity is a marker of metabolic disease and there is an increased risk. But actually, many people who have a normal body mass index will have these metabolic abnormalities that contribute to poor health, up to 40% of those people with normal weight. So it's something we all need to think about. So yes, I would say, to answer your question, get your diet right. Get the food right, cut out the junk. You will feel better physically and mentally within weeks. Okay. Some people will find it difficult initially. It might feel a bit rough when they cut sugar out of the diet, depending on how much they've been consuming. But very quickly, you will notice a difference and you will then start to feel better. And when you do, and this is the feedback, this is from my own experience, this is the feedback with my patients I've treated, they don't look back. They're like, wow, I feel like a new person. I can't believe, and I need to go through this slightly challenging phase with being disciplined for a few weeks first to be able to then sustain it. Okay, so that's what I would say.
And if we look at China, if we look at Italy, and we look at those that died or had serious complications of corona, most of them had sort of 2 or 3, not just 1, but 2 or 3 underlying problems, whether that be sort of high blood pressure, whether that be obesity, diabetes, and so on and so forth. How quickly, if we're thinking that, let's say this virus lasts for a couple of months, and let's just say our family, we're going to get it 6 weeks, 8 weeks down the line, how quickly, if somebody's got high blood pressure, how quickly, if they've got too much sugar in the bloodstream, how quickly by ditching the fake foods and sort of coming down on the starchy carbohydrates, how quickly can changing your diet positively affect, say, blood pressure, blood sugar levels, and so on?
Within a few weeks, Steve. When I wrote the POPI diet as this 21-day plan, it wasn't to try and exaggerate any claims out. It was just to change the narrative that people can change their health dramatically within a 3-week period. And of course, it does depend where you're starting from. The people who are the most vulnerable and the most sick actually get the greatest benefits most quickly.
Yeah.
People who are slightly on the borderline may only see slight abnormality, slight improvements. But even then, it can be quite a lot. This, as you probably know, Sarah Cox, very, well-known broadcaster on the BBC, been around for a long time. And she contacted me after she'd heard me speak on the Jeremy Vine show about the diet plan. And she wasn't particularly unhealthy at all. She's been quite fit and active, and I think ate relatively well as far as I know from what she told me. But she said when she went on POPI diet, and again, very quickly within a few weeks, she said she was able to lose 8 pounds and get rid of that, what she described as this muffin top that she always thought she would have for the rest of her life. But for her, that was still very meaningful. She wasn't in particularly poor health, but it still made a difference to, probably her health, her long-term health, as well as how she felt. So it's going to vary from person to person. But the reality is, yes, you will see a difference of varying magnitude, some quite extreme, in a very positive way, within 21 days of really cutting out the sugar, cutting out the starchy carbs, emphasizing foods which are whole foods, lots of vegetables, whole fruit, unprocessed meat, oily fish, nuts, eggs, full fat dairy. These are sort of what should be the base of the diet, Steve. And if people do that, and it's enjoyable as well, if they do that, then they will be in a much better state. Also to deal with the COVID-19 that has clearly overwhelming healthcare systems around the world, and is a huge major problem at the moment. I'm hoping that we should see within the next couple of weeks a decline in the deaths, as long as people stick to social distancing. And then we need to move forward more productively and think about how do we manage our healthcare systems? How do we stop doing unnecessary treatments? There's lots of them. Bruce Keogh, the former medical director of the NHS England, he actually estimated, I think it's probably more than this, 1 in 7 of all surgical treatments carried out in the NHS is completely unnecessary. Patients are not aware of this. We have perverse incentives. We got, so many things going wrong where people are not actually truly giving informed consent to drugs they're being prescribed or operations they're undergoing. And this is a widespread system failure. This needs to change, Steve. This needs to change, and we need to put lifestyle at the forefront.
It's really, really good advice, Sim. I'm going to ask you one question, and then there's got loads of questions coming in live, so we'll go to these questions straight after. So my question is this. If we can use this moment with McDonald's closed, Greg's closed, restaurants closed to change our eating habits, if people can cut down on those starchy carbs, get back to eating real food, then that gets you in a great position to start intermittent fasting, because I don't think anybody can fast while you're on that sugar carb coaster, while you're quickly having these highs and lows with insulin. So I think the only way to really fast is once you've got into eating real wholesome foods. Would you also subscribe to the fact that something I believe, but tell me whether you think this is right, and that is that if you're intermittent fasting, while you're eating food, your body's metabolizing that food. While it's metabolizing, it can't be in repair mode. For me, it's quite black and white. You're either eating food or repairing. Eating food or repairing. That's why fasting's really good. And I guess while we're in repair mode, maybe that's probably one of our best defense times against COVID-19. Would that be a logical conclusion or not?
Steve, it's a difficult one. I think over the longer term, then intermittent fasting does seem to have some benefits. In the short term, people should not be, and I don't want to use this word, take it out of context, but starving oneself can actually depress the immune system acutely.
Yeah, sure.
So I think over the long term, yes. So I think the first thing to do is get into the eating real food bit. Depends where you're starting from. And of course, yes, I do intermittent fasting probably, 2 to 3 times a week at least. But on top of that, you've got to think about everything else you're doing, because, and this happened to me, it happens to my patients. I'm not here trying to say that, everything has a potential harm. But if you're intermittent fasting, you're not sleeping well, and you're overdoing the exercise, it's very bad for you.
Okay.
It can be some of the worst thing you can do for your health, mentally, physically, energy levels, stress hormones going up. So there's a downside to that. But yes, I think take things in stages, get the real food, keep your activity moderate. You don't need to over-exercise. That's the other thing, just 30 minutes of moderate activity a day probably is the optimum exercise you can do. After a certain amount, overdoing it increases mortality, increases your risk of respiratory infections. So I think we just have to think about all of those things together.
You said to me once, because there's a well-known saying that says you can't out-exercise a poor diet. And then you came along and said it's easier than that. You can't out-exercise your fork. I thought that was a great one. You gave me that quite some time ago. And you're right. I think exercise, some people over-exercise. Anyway, we've got some questions coming in. So Samuel says, hi Asim, what exercise would you suggest is best that isn't overly strenuous on my body?
Getting a brisk walk or do something in the house. So one way, it's a very nice way, if you've got, a lot of people have apps or they can check their pulse. It's a bit more challenging checking your pulse, but you can still do that when you're exercising, is you want to be getting your heart rate to between 50 and 70% of your target and maintain that for 30 minutes. What's your target? Very simple equation, 220 minus your age.
Okay.
Cut that in half of what that number is. So say you're 40, 220 minus 40 is 180. 50% of that is 90. So you want to get it between 90 and maybe up to 110 and sustain that for about 30 minutes. That's what we call moderate activity. So that's what you should be trying to do, 30 minutes a day, 5 times a week. And from a cardiovascular point of view, that's optimized. Of course, other things you need to think about. One thing you can do at home, I've been teaching my dad this, is there's a very simple thing you can do. Don't sit for longer than 45 minutes. And if you do, get up and do some squats. So literally just stand up, sit down 10 times, have a little rest, do 4 sets of those.
Yeah.
You know, these are some nice simple things you can do also for, you know, keeping your core and your muscular strength in your legs as well.
That's great advice. Daxa says, I'm almost 5 years on a lowish carb paleo lifestyle. Could never go back to following the UK dietary guidelines as I believe they made me sick. Aseem, why do we still have these crazy guidelines?
Yeah, Steve, I think a number of reasons. One is flawed science hasn't been updated, which really demonized fat, and we know that that's been a big problem. The second aspect, which I think wasn't intentional but has happened unfortunately and hasn't been dealt with, is how the food industry then took those scientific guidelines and then started marketing a lot of ultra-processed low-fat junk foods. I think you can, by the way, have a very healthy low-fat diet, absolutely. But that's not what most people are following. You know, if you're having a vegetable, just if you're vegetarian, eating, you know, lots of veggies and whole fruit, and you're not having lots of starch, that can be a very healthy diet. I'd like to say, you know, chuck in some olive oil on top of that as well. But you can have a very healthy diet, but it isn't what people are adhering to. People are buying foods on the way they're marketed, not the nutritional content. So this is part of it. And then the third aspect is, unfortunately, one of the reasons why these dietary guidelines haven't changed is a lot of the people who are behind it, who are making up the guidelines, have direct financial links to the food industry who profit from selling you junk food. Now, this isn't about conspiracy theories. It's just the way business is done, but we've allowed it to infiltrate what should be independent science. And that is something that we as doctors, you know, as public health advocates, need to challenge, call out, and really fight against, you know, and get this system changed. That's what needs to be done. So that explains why current dietary guidelines are a complete and total mess.
And they are complete and total mess because really they only came around in the 70s in the UK, so 40 years ago. In the last, I'll make my point from earlier on, in the last 50 years, the average adult has put on 2.5 stone. So if we put on 2.5 stone, 17 kgs, since we've had guidelines, it kind of says it doesn't work. And you can't say it's people being lazy because there are more people exercising now than ever before. Jogging and cardiovascular work and aerobics the word aerobics didn't even exist till the end of the 60s.
Absolutely.
So
and Steve, just to emphasize something else as well, just coming back to the whole issue about healthy weight, if you think about this, go back to the 50s, 60s with very low type 2 diabetes prevalence, very low obesity rates, we had the highest death rates from heart disease, you know, much higher then than we do now. Of course, it's still the #1 killer, but the number of people dying from it was much higher. And these people were a so-called healthy weight.
Right.
Okay, so it's not about, you know, of course, then it was more smoking prevalence, probably that was the biggest factor. But we have to think about overall health. This healthy weight thing has also been unhelpful. There's no such thing as a healthy weight, only a healthy person.
That's really, really, really good point. Angela says, you mentioned olive oil. Do you believe that it has health benefits? Angeline, I've never heard a better spokesperson than Aseem for olive oil. Give us a 20 seconds.
Can I just add before I give you the answer to that? I have no links in any way to any olive oil company. I've never been paid by them, never been paid by going to speak at a conference. So I just want to add that in. Listen, you know, nutritional science is not the most rigorous science we have. But if you look at all of the evidence so far on nutritional science, on biological effects, anti-inflammatory effects of olive oil, observational studies, some randomized control trials. Yes, I think it does. Good quality extra virgin olive oil, I do think is a very healthy base fat, has anti-inflammatory components, it's got omega-3, it's got vitamin E. So yeah, if in terms of the hierarchy of so-called healthy fats, olive oil is definitely at the top there.
Brilliant. And you haven't got any links. I've checked you out so many times. You are so clean, it's unbelievable.
Well, actually, to be honest, I won't name them. A company did contact me and wanted to pay me thousands of pounds to promote their product. I said, well, absolutely not, because although I have an intellectual bias towards olive oil, I definitely do not want a financial one.
It's been brilliant. Will you stay on the line? Is Ian available yet, Jack? My children, by the way, Aseem, are directing the show today. Who's over there? Oh, Jess and Jack are driving the show today. Say hello, kids, to Aseem. No, they've been. Oh, he's been shot.
All right, guys.
He can't get to you for some reason with the camera. We'll try and get Ian on, and then we can maybe have a three-way conversation. Let's read out some more questions. Chris Patterson, a PHC ambassador from Bradford. said, weeks for me as well, Daxa. We went cold turkey and went straight to keto, and it's been nearly 5 years. That's an interesting one about going cold turkey, just diving straight in. One of the things I've been saying, Asim, is look, one of the things you have to do when you make that decision to change your eating habits, you have to clean out your cupboards at home, because if you don't, that temptation for that to just quickly knock some pasta up, or that temptation for the bread, or that temptation for the biscuits, just will be overwhelming. So you've got to get rid of it. And what I bet there could be no better time to clear out your cupboard than right now, where the food banks need food. So clean out your cupboard, decide when you're going to start, maybe tomorrow, Monday, maybe Tuesday, decide when you want to start. Go and give all the pasta and the rice and the biscuits to the food banks. Now, you might say, well, then that's damaging people at the food banks. And I say, well, not really, because there's a huge difference between optimal nutrition and hunger. And if somebody's hungry, some food's better than no food. Yeah. So hunger and good nutrition. So they're asking for things like pasta and biscuits at the moment, because they're easy for people to prepare and consume. But use that moment right now. Clean out the cupboard at home, your pantry, stock it up tomorrow or this afternoon on Monday, and just go for it, because we're saying, the third best defense mechanism after social distancing, after washing our hands, is to eat real foods. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. I think you've also hit the nail on the head about the so-called food environment within your household. We know that the food environment itself, in terms of why, what's the kind of biggest factor driving the obesity problem, is the fact that all these foods have become unavoidable. So getting them out of your house is definitely a very useful step to do to avoid that so-called temptation, that automatic impulse to pick up those foods and eat them.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolute tragedy, and we shouldn't make light of what's happening at the moment. But if there's a silver lining, the fact there's no McDonald's, Greg's, Subway at the moment, something positive has to change for Great British Diet right now. And I believe we've got Dr. Ian Lake with us. Ian, how are you this morning? Well, we can't hear you yet, Ian. Is your microphone on? We can't hear Ian. While we're trying to sort out Ian's mic, let me give a quick introduction to Dr. Ian Lake. Dr. Ian Lake is a brilliant GP. He is also a type 1 diabetic himself, and to try and raise awareness for type 1 diabetes, he has tried to walk from John O'Groats to Land's End without any food intake, to prove that you can sustain a lot of energy from burning your own body fat. Can you hear it? You talk? No, we still can't hear you yet, Ian. Trying to get your microphone. And Ian got almost the whole way. He started off in John O'Groats. He got to about Bristol, but then sadly damaged his knees, and it was his knees that gave in, not his metabolism, that prevented him from making it the whole way. Ian, can we try your mic again? Okay, Jack, any suggestions for Ian? Let's go back to Asim then, while we try and sort out Ian's mic. Maybe we get him on the phone. Ian, one more try. No. Okay. So while we're waiting for Ian, Asim, let's answer some more questions. Yvonne Milton says, "Is erythritol okay to use when baking low carb?" That's spelled ERYTHRITOL. I'm dyslexic, so I can't pronounce that.
It's an artificial sweetener, so I don't think directly there's any evidence that I'm aware of harm. The only thing I would say is that if people are trying to quit sugar, depends where you're at, then you want to avoid all sweet stuff, because otherwise you're still going to crave the sweet stuff. But if you're somebody that's gone through it all and you're having it occasionally, I don't think it's a problem. But there's no direct harm I'm aware of from erythritol as an artificial sweetener.
Yeah, I mean, the only things that I've read about artificial sweeteners is that there's a potential link to damage the microbiome, but that's not yet proven. So, Ian, can we try Ian again? Yeah. We can't hear Ian just yet. Have
you done three-way before, Steve, on this? Is it because I'm on?
No. It's definitely a microphone issue at Ian's end. Asim, talk. Is porridge okay even if you are on keto? Says Jay. porridge. What's your view on porridge?
Listen, again, it depends what your goals are, what you want to achieve, where you're at. So in terms of glucose control, ketogenic diet does seem to be the best for glucose, but I don't just look at glucose alone, because obviously there's a danger of being purely reductionist. If we just focus on glucose and forget about everything else, you may be doing some harm, because the other issue is chronic inflammation, which is, also at the root of many of these diseases and heart disease. So personally, somebody that, I'm metabolically healthy, although I have risk factors in my family. And I'm quite active in the sense that I will do resistance training. I personally, Steve, have found that having porridge in the morning with protein and berries and flaxseed and some dark chocolate, for me is the sort of and I've tried different things. For me personally, is the best breakfast. So in general, there is no issue with porridge. However, if you're a type 2 diabetic, you may find that porridge spikes your blood glucose significantly, and you may not need to have porridge to still function optimally in terms of how you feel, in terms of energy, etc. So I think it varies. But in general, no, I don't think there's a major problem with, pure porridge oats, not the stuff full of added sugar, etc. But pure porridge oats, small amount of that, have it with some protein if you can, stick some berries in there. But my regular breakfast now at the moment, and it's, changed to, a lot of the time I'll have eggs and bacon, for example. Quite frequently, my regular breakfast in the morning is porridge.
Okay, that's really interesting. In fact, if you listen to Patrick Holford, who wrote The Hybrid Diet, which is a great book, switching the body from one to the other, from carb burning to fat burning. He's a big believer on those carb days, then you can have porridge. My personal story is, if I even smell porridge, I put on weight. If I look at it, I put on weight. I'm so carb adverse. I was obese for 25 years. I was obese, and for me, if I'm going to have breakfast, it's got to be the eggs or the bacon or the full fat yogurt, because if I go anywhere near porridge, just the waistline just expands like crazy. Should we try Ian one more time? You still can't hear Ian. Right, we'll crack on without Ian right now. Chris Patson says, Yvonne, I found my taste buds changed in a month and I no longer crave sugar. An excellent book on cravings and how to overcome them is Break the Crave by Bridget Hamilton, available on Amazon. Now, I've not heard of that book, so I'm going to go and get that one later, Break the Crave. But it is true, isn't it? Your taste buds, and we had Nina Teicholz on, your taste buds can change really quickly. I never thought I could cope without bread, but now if I have bread, it just doesn't taste the same as it used to.
Yeah, absolutely. It happens within a few weeks. I mean, even from a personal perspective, Steve, some people have heard this story before, but I used to gorge on sugar. And thinking back now and trying to calculate what the kind of foods I was eating, I was probably having about 40 teaspoons of sugar a day. I remember when I was during my elective, which is something, in finally in medical school, as medical students, we could go around the world for a few months and practice and see how medicine is, practiced in different countries. I spent a couple of months in India and Delhi, and I discovered this ice cream place which had the best strawberry ice cream that I've ever had in my life. And I liked it so much that every day, without fail, after dinner, I would go there and get a triple sundae with hot fudge sauce, right? And the reason I'm telling you this is, and I got used to that and I loved it and I enjoyed it. And a few years ago, I was in Miami with some friends, and I walked to, by Haagen-Dazs, and I thought, I've not had one of these sort of, these sundaes for a while as a one-off. Let me just, let's see how it is. And I had one taste. It tasted absolutely awful. It was so sweet. And I thought, wow, years ago I would have been able to devour that and enjoy it. I just couldn't stand it because my taste buds, had completely changed. So I binned it.
Now, I think we have got Ian's mic.
Hi.
Great.
Ian, how are you doing, Ian?
Good, all good. Sorry about that.
That's quite all right. Are you bearing up okay?
All good, yeah, all good. I'm a bit locked down, really, because of my type 1 diabetes, which is very, very frustrating. But what can you do, really? You can do your bit.
So our topic today, Ian, and the microphone's all yours, is after social distancing, like you're doing right now because you're diabetes, after washing your hands frequently and properly, Is eating real foods probably the third best thing that we could all be doing right now? So, microphone's yours.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk, Asim, about the
Nothing on that screen, Jack. Nothing on that screen. So we had a bit of a computer crash there for the first time. We'll try and reconnect Asim and Dr. Ian Lake. While we're reconnecting, lots of you putting great comments onto the chat right now. So I'm going to go through as many as I can while we wait to get the doctors back with us. Can I mention, says Daxa, that people with autoimmune conditions as well benefit massively from following a real food diet. And Dev Patel says, amazing chat, thank you. Had to get through to family members when GPs are not giving the right advice on nutrition. What about salt? Isn't Himalayan salt good? Also, heating olive oil isn't that bad. Okay, so let's answer that one, Dev. So, is salt good or bad for you? So, for years and years and years, we were told don't eat salt, weren't we? And personally, for like 20 years, we didn't even have salt in our home. So when people would come around for dinner, they'd say, where's the salt? And we'd have no salt because salt's bad for us, isn't it? So this is what happened. I then heard about this guy, Dr. James Dinical-Antonio, who's a brilliant guy, based out in the US and Canada. He wrote this book called The Salt Fix. And if I tell you right now that for most people, having too much salt in your diet isn't a problem, because for most people, unless you've got a kidney problem, your kidneys will deal with salt. And actually, while lots of salt maybe put blood pressure up, having too little salt increases heart rate, as in how many beats. Both of them are dangerous. So get this book. I don't want to answer it right now. I personally have got salt back on the menu at home. And in fact, the more you eat real foods as opposed to processed foods, the chances are, if anything, you probably need more salt in your diet. Right. Sorry about the crash, everybody. I think we've got Ian. You're back. So
Thank you.
I'm afraid we might have to start that all over again. But
that's fine. Yeah.
Tell everybody your story, Ian, and what we can do after social distancing, after washing our hands. How does real food help bolster the immune system?
Well, I think real food is the key, really, to managing all types of diabetes. Nobody, in the latest figures on COVID, obviously diabetes comes out second as the highest risk factor, apart from age, which is rather a concern, really, isn't it? It's above respiratory disease, and most people would expect respiratory disease to be the biggest risk factor. So clearly there's something going on in diabetes. And I would imagine the figures are for type 2 diabetes, which is more of a, what you call inflammatory condition caused by the inability of our bodies to tolerate certain foods in the diet if you're vulnerable to diabetes. And of course, they're mostly carbohydrates. And the sheer volume of carbs that we're having at the moment is leading to an explosion of the diabetes, as Asim was talking about in his last article. So real food above everything else, really. And even if you're going to have, if you prefer carbohydrates, you need to avoid the sources of refined carbohydrates and junk food, what we call junk food, because they're full of not only the wrong sort of carbohydrates, i.e. refined sugars, but there's almost certainly going to be many additives in there as well. My own story is that as a type 1 diabetic, I almost had a severe hypoglycemic attack in the middle of the night when I was wild camping in Norway. And I was cycling around the North Sea cycle route, which is sort of includes most of the countries to the east of the UK. And for some reason, I woke up in the middle of the night with a blood glucose of 2.4. And as most people with diabetes will know, that's quite low. And I felt okay, but I did feel hypo. And having used up all of my glucose supply, I had a bit of a situation where my blood glucose was still plummeting with no means of rescuing it, being about a mile from the nearest town at 4 in the morning. So I had to pack up my stuff. I was camping at the time and cycle to the nearest road. And as luck would have it, slightly ironic, I found some carbohydrates in a lay-by, sort of tossed away in a lay-by, and they saved me from disaster, really. So it sounds like an interesting story, but it sort of scared me a bit because I always prided myself on the fact that I could exercise my way out of type 1 diabetes. And at that moment, I realized that I couldn't, and I was putting myself in danger. And I'd read the book by Richard Bernstein's Diabetes Solution, which is aimed at type 1 diabetics. I'd read it a year before, but having a traditional medical education, I sort of thought, well, he's a bit extreme. There's far too much fat going on there, and I'll give that a miss. So I revisited Richard Bernstein's Diabetes Solution as soon as I got back home, and it was transformative. There's no doubt about it. Changing my diet from a carbohydrate-based diet to one with very few carbohydrates, I use a ketogenic diet, gave results with my type 1 diabetes from day one. And that was probably the last piece of bread I ever touched in that lay-by, because I haven't eaten any bread since then. And because things have been so transformative, clearly you go into things a lot more, and it became very apparent very early on that the diet that I was recommending my patients was just not appropriate for their particular condition. So real food all the way. I can't overemphasize that. Eat what your great grandmother or your grandmother would have eaten, and I think that's probably about right.
Is there a word of is there a word of warning for people that are diabetic type 1 like yourself, that if you're going to make that change though, and you are injecting every day, to do that, in consultation with the doctor? Because
you have to have knowledge of what you're doing. But most people with type 1 diabetes, for those that don't know, we tend to inject 2 types of insulin: a very long-acting insulin, which you inject once or twice a day. That covers the background levels of sugar that are being produced by your body, irrespective of whether you're eating anything at all. And then you have rapid-acting insulin, which you inject just before a meal to cover the carbohydrates in your meal. So for people with type 1 diabetes, they're mostly injecting about the right amount of long-acting insulin, but they will need to obviously reduce their insulin, the short-acting insulin, to compensate for the severe reduction in carbs that they experience with a very low-carb diet. Some people would choose to do that in a staggered way. Other people would do it all in one go. But it does require expert advice, really. I've been trying to write a course on this for a long, long time. But at the moment, Richard Bernstein's Diabetes Solution is a good starter point for that. Excellent. But the good thing about it is you do get results from day one, which is remarkable. I remember my very first day eating an omelette for breakfast. I don't have breakfast now because it doesn't suit my particular metabolism. But it was remarkable how the blood glucose just stayed stable for the next 6 to 8 hours. And that was a revelation. And of course, once you got that, you want more of it. Sure. And people with type 1 diabetes do very, very well on a very low carbohydrate diet by and large. Just getting access to the information, really.
Absolutely. And now I'm going to look at the screen and find some questions coming in for you. While I look at the questions, tell everybody, when you tried to walk from John O'Groats to Land's End, what was the thinking behind that?
Well, the thinking behind that was a logical extension of what I'd done before. When I was doing my higher carb normal diet, I was obviously stacking for carbs when I was doing half marathons, and I used to get quite a lot of injuries at that stage. And when I went keto, I decided within a year of that to do a half marathon a month, which Prior to that, it would have been impossible for me. I was just one big effort a year, and that would have done. So I managed to do that, and then I started experimenting with not eating and fasting, and I managed to find that for me personally, the preferential preparation was just to have water before a run and not have any breakfast if it was a morning run. And the logical extension of that was to say, well, let's do a longer distance just to show that you can. It wasn't a fast. This wasn't fasting. This was low carbohydrate. It was to show that you do not need carbohydrates for energy, because still people say, oh, you need carbs if you're going to do any running, or if you're going to run up mountains, you need carbs. Well, you do to some degree. If you're going to run up mountains, for example, well, a mountain's what, 3,000, 4,000 feet? So that's less than half a mile. Well, yes, you can probably get away with using carbs for that. But I think, well, if you're going to burn fat, you can run hundreds of miles without needing carbs at all. So I was trying to show that in type 1 diabetes, you do not need carbohydrates, because time and time again, I get told, oh, if you're having insulin, you need carbs. If you have the correct amount of insulin, actually, you don't need carbohydrates. You only need carbohydrates when you only need more insulin when you're taking more carbohydrates. So that's quite important. So I set out to try to show that really you can get long distances without eating carbohydrates. So my overall carbohydrate intake was 9%, which is about 50 grams a day of carbs, which is quite low, really.
And you got all the way from John O'Groats to Bristol, didn't you?
John O'Groats to Bristol. I was trying to get to Land's End, and then I had a knee bursitis in the knee, which as a GP I think is a fairly minor injury, but for me personally it was terrible. I've never had such bad knee pain. It took 3 months to get over it. But thankfully back to normal now. So that was an exercise in showing you don't need carbs for energy.
Yeah,
the fact the amount of carbs I took wouldn't have got me even to Inverness, let alone down to Bristol. So the rest of the time I was burning fat, and I wasn't actually starving with burning fat, because I wasn't losing weight. My weight dropped by about 5 pounds in the first 3 weeks, then it stabilized. So I was obviously in equilibrium. So the ketogenic or low carbohydrate diet isn't a starvation diet. So when you're producing ketones, you're not necessarily starving.
absolutely.
That's quite important, really.
So Julia's asked, if we can't dedicate to going full-blown keto, what level of carbs is considered low carbs? Is this a useful way to start for beginners?
I think that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. Yes, I mean I'm a bit extreme. I'm very much at one end. I try to eat as few carbs as possible, but a rough guide, I would think that most people are having about 300 grams of carbs a day as part of what you call the normal diet. And looking at our type 2 people with diabetes, I would think to about 100 to 150 grams would get most people into a safe zone of carbs as a starter. And once people get going, they sort of want to go further. For type 1 diabetics, most of the evidence is around 75 grams of carbs a day, and that shows you can get quite significant benefits from that level of carbs, which is considered a low carbohydrate diet, but not a very low carbohydrate diet. The problem with type 1 and carbs is you're always having to balance your carbs and insulin together. So the more carbs you take, the more difficult it is to control your insulin, and that's the big problem with type 1. So because I've never been very good at managing my diabetes, I must put my hand up to that. I tend to say, well, if I cut the carbs out altogether, life's going to be so much easier for me. People with type 1 diabetes can do well, and they can get into the normal range a lot of the time. But when you look at the National Diabetes Audit, only 3% or 5% of type 1s actually achieve a very, very modest HbA1c of 48 millimoles per mole. If you're type 1 listening to this, you'll realize that's not a bad figure. But only 3% of people make that.
Right.
And the normal value starts at around 42 or less. So even getting type 1s to higher than desirable level of HbA1c, only 3 to 5% achieve that according to the UK figures. So the diet we're using isn't brilliant at the moment. So we need to make changes to improve our chances, really.
Absolutely. Graham says, I've lost 44 kg in 2
Wow.
years doing keto. He's got a leaking heart valve. So again, when you have things like this, it really is important to get the weight under control. Well done, Graham. Stephen Swally says, hi Ian, does that info apply to people with type 2 diabetes too? So basically, I think when Stephen was asking that, it was just off the back of talking about cutting down the carbs. So does that sort of apply the same for type 1 and type 2?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a real food diet. I mean, all we're trying to do here is achieve a real food diet. And unfortunately, we've been led into a high carbohydrate diet, which is not really, you can get real foods within a high carbohydrate diet, but I think the amount of carbohydrates we're taking from 60% of the population probably isn't ideal. And we're taking overall too much carbohydrate. So in type 1 diabetes, you're managing your carbohydrates around your insulin, but in type 2, you're reducing your carbohydrates to improve your personal metabolism.
Yeah.
Now, everyone with type 2 is different, same as everyone with type 1 is different. So you have to find your own level. Some people with type 2 diabetes will only need to give up small amounts of carbs, really, to achieve normal sugars again. But they'll be still vulnerable later on if they don't cut them back. So yes, definitely it applies to type 2 as well as type 1, but for different reasons.
Sure, thank you for that. Samuel says, Ian, does the time of day that we eat carbohydrates also impact our body?
Well, I think it does. And I think type 1 diabetics are very well placed here to do the research for everyone else, because we directly understand how blood glucose changes and how insulin affects our bodies. And in type 1 diabetes, there's more to affecting the diet more to affecting your blood glucose than just diet. There's emotion, there's stress. If you're a woman, there's periods. Then time of day impacts on that, probably because of the different hormones. I mean, for me personally, I never eat until about 2 in the afternoon. And the reason for that is that I tend to get, I think, more stress hormones in the morning, and I can't get my blood glucose to come to a reasonable level if I eat. So yes, I do think it impacts. Certainly also eating after about 8 o'clock at night will make a big difference to my sugar control. And I think a lot of people have noticed that talking to them. If you're lucky enough to have a continuous glucose meter, and I think everyone should have one really if they have diabetes, certainly on medication. You will notice that if you eat late, your blood glucose will kick up to a higher level than desirable and stay there all night. So you get this thing called insulin resistance. We talk a lot about it with respect to obesity and type 2 diabetes, but I think you get this short-term insulin resistance that's associated with the types of food we eat and the time of day. So, for example, even if you're eating a semi-keto-like food like nuts, which contain a mixture of protein and fat and carbohydrate, some people will find that they will cause a certain amount of insulin resistance. So it doesn't matter how much insulin you put into your body, you won't get your blood sugar down. So something within that food is causing your body to be resistant to insulin. More pertinent at the moment is COVID, obviously, and sure. When you have any infection, you will get a huge amount of insulin resistance. So when people with diabetes, certainly type 1, hopefully not, but if you end up getting COVID, you're going to have to be aware that you might need to guard more against diabetic ketoacidosis than hypos, certainly in the early stages. So you need to be careful with that. So yes, the time of day, the type of food we eat, and our emotions will greatly affect our insulin resistance. And with type 1s, we can show you that by just the amount of insulin we need to cover all those eventualities.
Yeah.
Some women who are having a period will double their insulin requirements throughout that week, which is remarkable. It's never talked about very much, but it's a reality for a lot of women.
Yeah, hormones put and we have so many different hormones in the body, do put massive drains and increases on all sorts of scenarios, also enzymes change and all sorts of things happen.
Sure.
Daxa says, sorry, previous comment referring to Simon. I've lost the thread on that one. Dev Patel says, and at what level blood sugar is safe to come off meds? What's the safest way to reduce the drugs like metformin? That's a good question. In fact, Dr. David Unwin sort of covered that yesterday. That you shouldn't change your sort of eating if you shouldn't change your diet, if you like, while you're on medication for diabetes. But he did say it may be a little bit different with metformin. We've sadly come to the end. Ian, we'd love to have you back on next week if that's at all possible, or the week after.
Very lovely, thank you. That was great. Sorry about the microphone issue. That's my error entirely.
No worries at all. We're all learning this stuff.
What a great series this is, Steve, I must say, and hopefully you're getting a lot of donations, because so many people are just one pay packet away from complete disaster, and what you're doing is remarkable to help that out.
Well, we're all trying our best, and without you guys coming on, it wouldn't be happening. So thank you very, very much indeed. Lovely.
Take care, everyone. See you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
That was the incredible Dr. Ian Lake, and a GP and a type 1 diabetic himself. So I hope you found that really, really useful. Now, we're going to have one more guest on in about 2 or 3 minutes' time, which is Samantha Stapley from the Trussell Trust. Before we do that, though, let's just remind ourselves what the program is all about. We're trying to help you get through this and be as healthy as possible, because we think the third best line of defense after social distancing and washing our hands is eating real foods. We're also trying to raise money for the Trussell Trust, who operate over 1,200 food banks here in the UK. And what we're saying is this: there is a whole list of foods they want us all to donate into those collection boxes in the supermarkets. And right now, there are things on there that ideally you and I, if we're trying to change our health around, really want to stop eating. We want to stop eating the rice, the pasta, and the biscuits. But there's a difference between optimal nutrition and preventing hunger. So why don't you have a look in your shelves today? Find if you've got pasta, rice, biscuits, or anything else that is on the list that maybe you want to cut out, like the milk or the fruit juices, because fruit juice is very, very high in sugar. In fact, we'll talk about that in just a moment. Why don't you check they're in date, and then take them to your local collection point, and then once you've emptied out your cupboard at home, your larder, then's the time to really think about making those changes to your diet, because as Asim said, within 21 days you can see massive differences, and within 21 days you're doing the third most important thing to help protect yourself from COVID-19 and Corona, in that you're doing everything you can to control your own defense mechanism. Now, yesterday we said to you, how much sugar do you think? Oh no, we've got a guest. Is that what we're saying? My son's waving like crazy at me. Say hello to everybody, Jack. You got your camera there?
Wow, but...
Kids, I got 7 of them. They always argue. They always argue with Daddy. And Jesse, wave at the camera. There's my children directing the show this morning. But they're saying no. More important than those, Dad. Let's go and speak to Samantha Stapley at the Trussell Trust. How are you?
Good morning, Steve. I'm well. Thank you very much. That was a very interesting last live broadcast there. I've learned quite a lot already myself.
Yeah, the guests, they're all so generous. They're all giving up their time because, they all really believe that one of the best things we can do at the moment is to, do anything that bolsters the immune system.
Yeah.
Now, tell us about we're trying to get somebody on from the Trussell Trust most days. Tell us about yourself and what we should be doing to help your trust and the food banks at the moment.
So I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the Trussell Trust, and at the moment, so we support our network of 1,200 food bank centres across the UK, providing emergency support to people who cannot afford to buy food, but more importantly, working towards a future where nobody should ever need to use a food bank again. At the moment, we're asking people to donate food to us, to support our network, and also to donate money if possible. So we're so grateful to you and all of your viewers as well for the support that you're giving to the network at the current time. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And one of the reasons I like your charity, I've never spoke to a CEO like Emma, she said within 5 minutes of our first conversation, she said,
Yeah.
I run a charity that wants to put itself out of business as quick as possible. I thought that's so true, because we shouldn't have hunger in the UK, and then if we get the message out, maybe one day, then we won't need your charity. But crikey, right now we do, don't we? I mean, so many people currently relying on the donations, and it's only probably going to get worse before it gets better.
Absolutely. But we are clear that hunger in the UK is not about food. It's about people not having enough money to afford the essentials. So as well as bringing together the experiences of our food bank in the network and their communities, we are about challenging the structural economic issues that lock people into poverty, and about campaigning for change to end the need. But you're right, at the moment, anecdotally, we know that our food banks are seeing significant increases in the number of people accessing food banks. So it's really, really important that that if people are able to donate, that they do so, whether that be food or money.
That's really, really so true. We need the money to operate, and even more than ever now, because you're having to do home deliveries, whereas before people would come into the centre. So we need more cash, as Bob Geldof will say, give us your money. But we still need those donations into those boxes. And I was saying earlier on that we're trying to, there's a difference between hunger and optimal nutrition, and we're trying to preach the message of cut down the carbs to build your defence. And maybe if people have got pasta, rice, biscuits, fruit juices that are, as long as they're within date, let's get them to the food banks. And where can they leave and drop off the food? Is it most supermarkets?
So most of the major supermarkets do have permanent collection points available, but also the easiest way to find out what each food bank needs is to go onto our website. There's a section for Give Food where you can put your postcode in. That will bring up your local food bank. It will give the needs that they have, because we know that each food bank might run low on different items at different times. And it will also tell people where they can drop off those donations. But certainly almost all of the supermarkets will have a permanent collection point just behind the till. And one of the things that we are aware of is that UHT milk is a real need at the moment as well. So if people are sitting on stores of UHT milk that maybe they thought they would need and realise that possibly they don't, it would be amazing if they could make those donations, because to make up an ambient 3-day food parcel, UHT milk is quite a staple for our network as well.
Yeah, in fact, yesterday I noticed in my local supermarket that the milk and eggs were the two things they had nothing of. So yeah, go and look in your cupboard at home, look in your pantry. Have you got some UHT milk that's in date that you could drop off at the food banks? That would be absolutely fantastic. Thank you, Samantha, for coming on the show. We're so over today because we had a little bit of a technical hitch earlier on. Will you come back maybe next week and give us a bit of an update?
We'd be absolutely delighted. And once again, thank you so much. We're so grateful on behalf of our network of food banks. Thank you, Steve, and to all the viewers. Thanks very much.
Samantha, you're more than welcome. We're just trying to do our little bit. And if anybody watching right now could please, it's a plea, go to justgiving.com and I will match pound for pound your donations up to £100,000. And here's the thing, if you get gift aid, so if you're a taxpayer in the UK, think about this. If you put, say, £8 in with the gift aid and then me doubling it, that's £20. If you put £20 in, it gets to about £50. If you put £40 in, it gets to about £100. So this makes a huge difference, and let's together really help those in most need at the moment in the UK. And as we get healthy together watching the programme with these brilliant doctors, let's try and reduce hunger for those that need it most. Samantha, thank you very much indeed. Right, to wrap up the show, before we go, one of the things we've been asking you at home is, what did you cook yesterday for the first time that's healthy? And lots of you taking part in this, which is really fantastic. So here's the thing, I keep banging the same drum, but with McDonald's closed, with Safeway, Subway closed, with Greg's closed, with all the restaurants closed, we're having to change our eating habits, aren't we? So try to cook something at home that you haven't cooked before that's really healthy. For inspiration, you could go to Primal Living's website. We've put our entire cookbook now, I haven't even got one here, but we've put our entire cookbook now up there for free to give you loads of inspiration. Primal Living's Instagram has inspiration, new ideas every single day on food. But cook something that you cooked for the first time that's healthy. Put a post on Primal Living Facebook page where lots of you are now doing, and at the end of this, as we come out the other side of COVID-19, we'll pick a winner and we'll either give you, let you choose, either £1,000 worth of jewellery donated by Gemporia or a weekend stay at a local, here in Warwick, boutique hotel, and we'll all come and have a meal with you. I think these...
hear about avocado.
Say again, we need to hear about avocado, we do. Is this somebody's inspiration here, Jack?
Yeah, I've just played through
So the ones that Jack's been putting up on your screen are your foods that you've cooked for the first time at home. Right, avocado is today's food fact. You can get it in oil or you can get avocados. What is food fact? We're asking you to write down what it was that was the food fact. So go back and look at the previous days, look for the green box, and get a list. And then at the end of lockdown, we're going to do the same. We're going to have a competition, find out who got the most right in a list, and then maybe if there's a heat, we'll pick a winner at random. And again, there'll be £1,000 prize for anybody that can remember all the different foods that we covered in Food Fact. Avocados, they're amazing. They're a great source of quality fats. They're full of vitamins and minerals. They literally are one of the very, very, very best things that you can have in your diet, and it also makes an amazing oil too. The other competition that we have, and that was yesterday, we said, guess how much sugar 1 glass of apple juice turns into once you consume it. And let me be very, very clear what I'm talking about here is what is the effect on the blood glucose, the sugar within our blood, if we were to eat or drink, should I say in this case, a glass of apple juice. What do you think it is? Well, how about if I told you it's the equivalent of over 8 spoonsful of sugar. So drinking an apple juice, apples are good, no doubt about that at all. But if you have an apple juice, you're losing all the goodness, you're losing all the fibre, you're losing all the benefits, and pretty much all you're getting is the sugar. And if you were watching yesterday when we had Dr. James Gornick on, apple juice rots the teeth. So I'm afraid apple juice is out. Now, what about tomorrow's competition for this one? Well, not competition, but guess the effect on the blood glucose level. What would a sandwich do to your blood glucose level? I'm just saying the bread. I'm not saying the filling inside. If you have 2 slices of bread on a sandwich, how many teaspoons of sugar does that turn into? We don't like bread here. That's why this one's just rubber. That's why it bounces off the wall. Anyway, God bless you all. Thank you to our guest today. Sorry we had that little bit of a technical hitch in the middle there. We'll try and stitch it all together. Dr. C. Malhotra was brilliant, wasn't he? Dr. Ian Lake, fantastic, telling us about his own stories battling with type 1 diabetes. And Samantha there from the Trust. Please do tell everybody. What we really, really would ask you to do is to subscribe below, to think of 3 or 4 people that you could share this program with, because we need more and more people there to rise up YouTube, to get the word out more, most importantly, help us raise more money for the food banks across the UK. Until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, keep safe.